Welcome to the 15th episode of RNV Talks, in which we will be discussing many different aspects of the history and culture of the Roma minority. This podcast is released as part of the EUROMIJA project implemented by the Roma National Council of Croatia in the framework of the European Solidarity Corps. Let's see what the team has in store for us today.
Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us. Today we're talking about a topic that affects many minority communities across Europe, including Roma communities: hate speech. Many of us have seen hateful comments online, heard stereotypes repeated in everyday conversations, or witnessed discrimination against people simply because of who they are. But what happens when this goes beyond hurtful words? Who is responsible for protecting people? And what is the European Union actually doing to fight hate speech against national minorities?
And now, before we begin, we should mention that we're going to talk about several European institutions and laws. Some of their names might sound complicated, but don't worry. Instead of focusing on legal language, we're going to explain what these institutions actually do and why they matter to people's everyday lives. Because when we talk about hate speech, we're really talking about people's experiences, their rights, and their ability to live with dignity and respect. So let's start with a simple question. When we hear the term hate speech, what exactly does it mean?
Hate speech is not just about offensive words. When people repeatedly hear negative stereotypes about a group, those stereotypes can influence how that group is treated. For Roma people, this can affect education, employment, housing, and interactions with public institutions.
And today, the problem is even bigger because hateful messages can spread online very quickly. A single post can reach thousands of people in minutes. That is why governments and international organizations have started paying much more attention to online hate speech.
So this isn't only about protecting feelings, it's about protecting people's rights and opportunities.
Exactly.
Many listeners may wonder, what can the European Union actually do when hate speech happens?
Well, the EU creates common rules that all its member countries agree to follow. One important example is the 2008 Council Framework Decision on Combating Racism and Xenophobia. Even though the title sounds complicated, its purpose is quite straightforward. It requires EU countries to treat public incitement to violence or hatred based on race, religion, descent, colour, or ethnic origin as a criminal offence.
So, if somebody publicly encourages hatred against Roma people, governments should not simply ignore it?
Exactly. The framework decision provides a legal basis for action.
And that commitment is supported by another important document, the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the EU. Think of the Charter as a list of basic rights that everyone in the European Union should enjoy. One article, specifically Article number 21, says that discrimination based on race or ethnic origin is prohibited.
So the message is clear. Equality is supposed to be a fundamental value throughout the EU.
If these protections already existed, why did the EU introduce additional initiatives?
Well, great question, because discrimination doesn't disappear simply because a law exists. The European Commission, so another institution, noticed that many minority groups continue to experience racism and exclusion. And that's why it introduced the EU Anti-Racism Action Plan for the period between 2020 and 2025.
But wait, before we continue, what exactly is the European Commission?
So the European Commission is one of the main institutions of the European Union. It proposes laws, develops policies, and monitors whether EU rules are being followed. Through the EU Anti-Racism Action Plan 2020-2025, the Commission officially recognized structural racism and anti-Gypsyism.
Anti-Gypsyism meaning prejudice and discrimination specifically directed against Roma people.
That's right. The action plan encourages countries to strengthen enforcement of anti-hate laws, support victims, and also work closely with civil society organizations. Some people might ask why Roma communities need a specific framework.
Well, because Roma communities have faced long-term discrimination across Europe. So the EU recognized that general anti-discrimination measures alone were simply not enough. And that's why it developed the EU Roma Strategic Framework for Equality, Inclusion and Participation, and this time covering a period from 2020 to 2030.
And what's interesting about this framework is that it doesn't only focus on discrimination. It also focuses on education, employment, participation in society, and inclusion. One of its priorities is combating anti-Roma hate speech and disinformation.
And disinformation means false or misleading information that spreads harmful stereotypes, I imagine.
Yes, exactly. The framework also encourages governments to involve Roma people directly when creating policies.
Okay, why don't we now talk a little bit about social media? Since many people experience hate speech online rather than face to face. So, how has the EU responded so far? Well, what I've read at least, the first step was the EU Code of Conduct on countering illegal hate speech online that was introduced in 2016. So essentially, the European Commission worked with major technology companies such as Facebook, YouTube, X, and TikTok. And these companies agreed, in a way, to review reports of illegal hate speech and remove content more quickly.
But that agreement was voluntary, right?
Yes, and over time, the EU wanted stronger commitments. So that's why in January 2025, the initiative evolved into the Code of Conduct on Countering Illegal Hate Speech Online Plus. The updated version includes stricter transparency requirements and clearer targets for reviewing reported content.
We often hear people talking about the Digital Services Act. Why is it considered such a big deal?
Because, unlike previous voluntary agreements, the Digital Services Act is legally binding. So, this means it creates responsibilities for very large online platforms. They must assess risks, including the spread of hate speech, and take action when illegal content is reported.
This law also requires greater transparency. Platforms need to explain more about how they moderate content and how some of their systems work. And if they fail to comply, they can face substantial fines.
So the EU is trying to ensure that large online platforms take responsibility for what happens on their services.
But how do policymakers know how serious hate speech actually is? Who gathers this information?
That's where the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights comes in. The FRA is an EU agency that researches human rights issues, collects evidence, and helps governments understand what is happening on the ground.
And in 2023, the FRA published a report called Online Content Moderation: Current Challenges in Detecting Hate Speech. The report found that women, Black people, Jews, and Roma are among the groups frequently targeted online. It also highlighted that both human moderators and algorithms can make mistakes when identifying harmful content.
So the FRA doesn't make laws, but it helps provide evidence for better policies.
That's right.
And what happens when online hate becomes a criminal matter?
Then organizations such as Europol become important. Europol helps police authorities from different European countries cooperate. Within Europol, there is the European Cybercrime Center, or EC3. This center focuses on crimes involving digital technologies and helps coordinate investigations across borders.
Which makes sense because the internet does not stop at national borders.
And who else pushes for stronger laws and policies?
Well, another important actor is the European Parliament. It represents citizens from across the European Union and helps create legislation. The Parliament has repeatedly called for stronger action against online hate speech and supported legislation such as the Digital Services Act.
And another important body is the Directorate General for Justice and Consumers, or DG Just. This is a department within the European Commission. It monitors how countries apply anti-discrimination laws, funds projects and campaigns, and works closely with the FRA. But is the EU still trying to strengthen its approach?
Well, yes. In December 2021, actually, hate speech and hate crime were proposed for inclusion among the areas covered by Article 83 of the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union. This could allow the EU to establish, let's say, a more harmonized criminal law rules across member states.
So, in simple terms, the goal is to make protections more consistent throughout Europe.
But what happens if discrimination still occurs?
Courts can play an important role, for example. One institution people often hear about is the European Court of Human Rights. The court examines cases involving human rights violations. And one example involving Roma communities is Sampanis and Others versus Greece. The case involved Roma children who experienced discriminatory treatment in education. The court concluded that desegregation of these children amounted to discrimination.
Exactly. And while the court has not yet issued judgments specifically about online hate speech against Roma communities, it has developed, let's say, broader principles on hate speech.
Exactly. The court recognizes freedom of expression as important, but it also recognizes that speech promoting hatred or violence can be restricted to protect the rights of others.
As we're getting near the end of today's discussion, one thing is becoming clear. Fighting hate speech is not the responsibility of one single institution, as we've seen. It involves laws, governments, courts, researchers, police cooperation, technology companies, civil society organizations, and communities themselves.
And for Roma communities, inclusion is just as important as enforcement. People need opportunities to participate in society and have their voices heard. Before we go, though, we'd like to leave you with one final thought. We've talked a lot today about laws, institutions, and policies, but fighting hate speech isn't something that only governments and organizations can do.
Precisely that. Every time hate speech goes unchallenged, it can contribute to discrimination and exclusion. But every report, every action, and every voice speaking up can help make a difference. And that's why it's important not to ignore hateful content when you encounter it online.
If you come across hate speech directed at Roma people on the internet, you can report it through promjeni.net, an initiative of the Roma National Council of Croatia. This is our platform that was created to help identify and document incidents of anti-Roma hate speech and to ensure that serious cases can be brought to the attention of the relevant institutions.
Reporting takes only a few minutes, but it can help protect individuals, strengthen evidence, and support efforts to combat discrimination.
Because creating a safer online space starts with all of us.
If you would like to learn more or to submit a report, visit our website promjeni.net. Together, we can stand against hate speech and build a more respectful and inclusive digital world.
Thank you for listening to this episode of RNV Talks. We hope today's discussion helped explain not only what the European Union is doing to combat hate speech, but also why these efforts matter. Until next time, goodbye everyone.